Welcome to the Live Alone podcast, the podcast where two nerds who consume a whole lot of horror discuss their favorite pieces of horror media. From movies and TV shows to video games, novels, and everything in between. Because this is a spooky world, and we're just thriving in it. I'm your host, Sarah, the survivalist in your slasher friend group that will put up a lasting fight, but inevitably die because only the final girl can survive.
And I'm your host, Ian, the fearless fighter in your slasher friend group that tries to save the day but ends up dying because physical strength just doesn't win in horror.
Today's episode is an intro to give you a little idea into what you should expect from this podcast. So, what do we mean by discussing horror media? Think scary movies, spooky TV series, creepypastas, video games, traditional games of the horror sort, novels, short stories, poetry, local legends, ghost stories. I think you get the idea. Whatever form it's in, we're consuming it, we're covering it, and we're excited to have chill but passionate conversations on why we think each piece is really great or maybe really terrible horror. We've got a full season ready to release, so be sure to subscribe to this podcast and stay tuned every Wednesday for new episodes. This week, right after you listen to this intro, we'll be covering the movie that spurred the inception of the name of this podcast and perhaps spurred the inception of this podcast as a whole. But for now, we're going to play a little game before wrapping this up. So, Ian, what's your favorite scary movie?
I'm going to say Halloween, 1978, not 2018.
Okay. Why specifically the original one?
Because that's the first time you see him. The first time you see him, it's not like you know what's going to happen. And, I mean, I was born in 1985, so around that time, that's like when all these horror movies were coming out. So my cousin would put on the movies and just watch our reactions, and everybody just, shitting themselves.
I mean, yeah. Were you one of those people that were shitting themselves?
Of course I was.
That's a good one. Yeah, and he, as in, of course, Michael Myers, for those who may be new to horror, that's a good one. I feel like that's a classic, especially because the opening scene, it just feels very Halloween, which is like all-encompassing of all horror, but we'll probably get into it more when we do a whole episode on Halloween. But yeah, that's a good choice.
What about you? What's your favorite?
My favorite scary movie, I think, is kind of obvious from the name of the podcast. It is Scream, specifically from 1996, not 2021. That one is, of course, the best one. It's the beginning of the entire franchise. It's so good. I feel like I've based a huge chunk of my personality off of it. So, I mean, that's also telling of the name of the podcast. But yeah, that one's my favorite. But we'll get more into that in our very first episode. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you know when our new episodes go up. And you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at liveralonepod if you want to follow along for behind the scenes, teasers, and real-time updates. Future episodes will have some shout-outs to our listeners, so tell us on social, what's your favorite scary movie? And for now, we'll see you in the kitchen with a knife.